There's a national threat facing America, and it's our educational system. According to recent reports, the education standards in America are dropping, and they're dropping fast. The rate of students dropping out in high school is at an all-time high. Crime in the classroom is rising, and more teachers are leaving the profession. Now, Congress wants to make cuts to federal funding for education. They want to hand the money over to the states and block grants and let them decide on how to spend it. Others, like the state of Pennsylvania, are starting to privatize their school systems, letting big business run their schools. And many parents say it's the parents who need to take more control over their child's education and fight for better education standards in America. Well, joining us now to talk about it from our Washington, D.C. studio is Jeanne Allen. Jeanne's the president of the Center for National Education Reform, and Michael Cohen, who's the special advisor to the Secretary of Education on Goals 2000, the Clinton administration's educational reform plan. Michael, let's start with you. Why is education in America in such bad shape?
Well, first of all, it's not in terrible shape. It's in fact gotten somewhat better in the last 10 years. Test scores are up slightly. The graduation rate is up slightly, but we still have a very long way to go. And I would say one of the things you said earlier about the solutions that are necessary, the importance of parents getting involved is probably the most critical single thing that could happen. It is very important for parents to work closely with teachers, to work closely with their own youngsters, to really help them learn and stress the importance of learning and working hard to learn.
And doing that every day. I want to talk to you about Goals 2000, which is President Clinton's initiative to help communities and states improve education. Some people have said that this is another federal mandate where we have bureaucrats in Washington dictating to local school boards what they should be doing. Others have said, well, really what Goals 2000 is about is helping communities develop strategies so that we can improve education in our communities and in America from one end to the other.
Well, it's certainly the latter, not the former. Goals 2000 is probably the most flexible federal education program that we've ever had. Goals 2000 asks states and local communities to set their own challenging standards for what students ought to learn academically in the basics and in the advanced subjects. It asks them to figure out their own approaches to improving their schools, and it gives them tremendous flexibility in how to do that. And it provides some funds that they can use to support that. And you see, if you look at communities that are participating, you see very different things going on. In Massachusetts, for instance, Governor Weld has used funds from Goals 2000 to jumpstart the creation of 14 charter schools that give parents and community members and others tremendous room to determine how best to run and organize a school. It really cuts all the red tape.
Jeanne, you come from a different perspective, though. You say Washington should stay out of education, and we should leave it up to the local communities, the local school boards, the parents.
Well, I think Mike makes some good points about flexibility. He may be very right that it's the most flexible piece of federal legislation ever to hit. But the reality is that federal legislation, to a large extent, I mean, Goals 2000 is not a one-page document, it's 1,000 pages, and there are a lot of constraints or strings that while they might not want to be enforcing them now, and this administration might be in earnest to say, look, we want to let you do what you want with the money, there is the specter that no federal program has ever been started that didn't create a mire of bureaucracy. And that doesn't come from me sitting in a think tank in Washington. It comes from people around the country. So my attitude is, there aren't a lot of people that were madly in love with Goals 2000. For some states, it simply means more money for certain programs. They're using it for a variety of things. Other states say, no way, we don't want to have a part, and we should give them that option and not say, well, they're somehow strange and radical if they don't want to take that. The problem is you have so many, the school system and the conditions path that you described earlier, we do have a long way to go. One of the reasons we're talking about that, quite frankly, today, is because there are so many regulations, particularly at the state level, but the federal government feeds it as well, and local districts feed it. And when you have parents and teachers and administrators that are under the gun every day and they're told what to do at every juncture of what they do, you really can't have true parental involvement, as in the charter schools Mike mentioned. I was up at one today in Boston, as a matter of fact, one of the ones that Weld was there to cut the ribbon today, and you have true parental involvement because parents said, we want our children going here. They were freed from all regulations except for the basic health and safety, and they're allowed to do what they need to do best. That's true reform.
Well, do you agree that we ought to have national education standards where where we're demanding from schools, from one end of America to another, certain levels of performance?
I think we need to be demanding certain levels of performance, but I'm not confident that as a nation we are able to be unpartisan or unpolitical about it. We're not Japan, we're not Germany, we're not able to transcend those differences, and special interests play very heavily into things. So I'd like to see at the state level things enforced from the states, adopted through a variety of consensus building processes, but however, rigorous, very rigorous, and mandated that children must take one of maybe several different kinds of tests. I mean, there are a number of formulas, but otherwise they won't graduate. Right now we talk standards in most states, and they sound good and they look good, but quite frankly, you can get by without meeting those standards. That's not reform.
Okay, let's go to the phones. We've got a lot of people who feel strongly about this, especially as school's starting across America this month. Let's go to Brenda, who's calling from Florida. Brenda, welcome to News Talk. What's your question or comment?
Okay, well, number one, I have 4 children. They all attend one school that goes from kindergarten to high school. I don't think there's maybe 800 students in the whole school, so the classes are small. They get the attention they need, which is important, and that's where a lot of the problem is in the inner city schools.
You bet it is.
Too many kids.
You bet it is.
And I was also going to say that a lot of the problems with the crime and violence in school is lack of discipline in the home. The people who are sending their kids to school are more or less like these welfare people, okay, who just want to sit home on welfare and really don't care how many kids they have. It makes their check bigger, and they, send them off, and that's their babysitter, and they sit around and do their thing.
Well, that's part of the problem, but hasn't part of the problem been that a lot of schools in the past haven't welcomed parents being involved in their education? It's kind of a foreboding place. You send your kids, and if we have a problem, we'll call you, but we're not encouraging you to be involved on a regular basis with education. Not like you
we
are.
don't have that problem down here. They are very active. The parents and the children and the teachers are very active, all as a unit. And even all the way up to the principal. Everybody works together as a team to help the child further their education in school, to the best of their ability.
Brenda, that makes a big difference. Thanks for your call. We appreciate your observations. Jeanne, you talked before about some of the federal government mandates. Some people complain, for example, that the federal government actually mandates that handicapped kids get an education. That's a federal government mandate. Are those the kinds of things you're opposed to?
Well, no, I don't think that's fair. Actually, I think there's an awful lot of schools that are simply saying that the federal government prescribes to the letter of the law everything they must do to provide for handicapped, and basically they're not stupid and unconcerned. They can do it themselves. Basically, the guidelines need to be there, and it's important that I think when it comes to handicapped and special ed kids, the federal government does have a role, as it has a role in research. But that role does not have to be as prescribed. There's tremendous debates, even among the 2 teachers' unions, about exactly what to do with handicapped kids. And I think, again, it comes down to we can do best for our children at the local level. Brenda just talked about a school that for her is working, and that's wonderful. There are effective schools like that all around, but that's not in the majority. And a local school district can say, gee, we've got to deal with these kids. Give us the money. Let us figure out how best to do it. Let us be accountable to the community. But the element that's missing today in most schools is that critical accountability that says, if you do a bad job or if you don't respond, I have an option. I have an out, or I can take you to the bank on it.
As a parent, okay, we've got to take a short break. When we come back, we'll get Mike Cohen. Welcome back. We've been talking about education in America. Some people say that our children, our most precious commodity, are most at risk in many schools across America. In fact, some 50% of all the people on welfare don't even have a high school degree. And as a result of the failures in education, we see high crime, high welfare, and we see people living in poverty. Mike Cohen, you're there in the Department of Education. President Clinton has made improving education in this country a priority. What is it that this administration wants to do about the high dropout rates, the fact that there are too many schools in America that aren't performing?
Well, there are a number of things we're trying to do. First and foremost, we're trying to help states and local communities around the country improve their schools by raising academic standards for students, by improving the curriculum, by developing tests to hold schools and students accountable. And all of those things help students focus on learning, help teachers focus on teaching, and can have a real effect on learning and on dropouts. We're also trying to help provide money to schools so that they can deal with crime and discipline problems, put in place policies and practices that deal with disruptive students. That's very important. And we're trying also to revamp and overhaul federal education programs that have been around for 20 or 30 years so that they support what people at the local level are trying to do, cut the rules and regulations and red tape, focus on results, and make it easier for people at the local level to get the job done.
You know, Jeanne, we heard before from a caller from Florida, Brenda, who talked about the fact that there are too many parents who don't care, who aren't involved in their kids' education. If you look, for example, in the Hispanic community in America, it's their dropout rate is 2.5 times that of the rest of us. So there are some particular problems with particular sectors of our society where education is failing them for some reason. What should be done?
Well, I'll tell you, it's sort of a chicken and egg. Who failed who first? I mean, if we make schools impervious to parents, then will parents be involved, or did parents get apathetic first? I think it's actually pretty patronizing, not you, Pat, personally, but in general, to think about parents not being concerned about their kids. On the whole, if you look at even the worst case scenario of a single parent who's really struggling and perhaps is on welfare and perhaps there's even substance abuse and they have a child going to school and everyone says, oh, write them off, they're not concerned.
Yep.
We have seen parents like that get excited about a school and become involved in their child's life because they had options, because schools reached out to them. But we don't let schools to a large extent reach out. You know, I wanted to comment on something. You know, Mike and my goals are not at all different. It's how you get there where I think the main disagreement is, probably like any issue. And one of the fundamental disagreements is this. There are federal programs that we've had in existence for years. One of the largest single billion-dollar programs is Chapter 1, for example. Chapter 1 helps remedially educate kids who are disadvantaged, about $600 per child. Its own evaluation study 2 years ago showed that Chapter 1 wasn't working. So did the federal government change it? No. They left it the way, and they
Jeanne,
said, let's counsel more.
I've got to jump in here because we have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll pick up on that point, and we'll get to your calls, so stay with us. Welcome back to News Talk Television. I'm Patrick Halpin. We've been talking about education in America, and there's a big debate going on. A lot of people are saying that this is an issue that should be left to the states and the localities, and the federal government has no role in education. Others, like President Bill Clinton, say that the federal government can do a lot to help communities and states improve education, and one way they're doing it is through providing billions of dollars through a program called Goals 2000 to assist communities in developing strategies to improve education. We've been discussing it with Jeanne Allen, who is the president of the Center for Educational Reform out of Washington, D.C., and also out of Washington, D.C., Michael Cohen, who's the director of the Department of Education's Goals 2000 program. Jeanne, you were making a point about a program that's been around for some time, Chapter 1, and it involves kids who need remedial education, primarily who are having difficulty with reading, with intensive interventions. A well-intended program. You say it hasn't been working.
It has not been working, and one of the reasons it hasn't been working is it's too structured about being accountable for rules followed and regulations followed and not for the actual result.
Mike, how do we get outcomes with Chapter 1? If we agree that, look, the federal government ought to be providing some dollars, let's make sure that we're actually getting something for that. What are you doing to improve it?
We've done a number of things. First of all, let's keep in mind Title I or Chapter 1 provides help to approximately 10 million youngsters around the country who need help learning basic and advanced skills. It has not been always highly effective, and we've made major changes in it. We've first of all changed it so that it aims to help those students learn challenging skills, not just low-level skills. Secondly, we've made it much more flexible. The pull-out efforts ought to be stopping. More and more schools that are participating in the program can use the money to improve the whole school, to do the kinds of things that the caller earlier in the show from Florida talked about, doing more personalized attention, smaller class sizes, and the like. That money can be used for those purposes. We have gotten rid of, and we're working very hard to send signals throughout the country that we are getting rid of the compliance orientation in it. If there are rules and regulations that get in the way, they can be waived, and we have been doing that for the last several months. And finally, we've made clear that the focus is on accountability for results. If schools are failing, the school districts that get the money need to step in and help turn those schools around. That's built into the law.
And parents should be demanding from their school boards, you know, what they're doing with that money.
Accountability for that money. That's right.
And what kind of results they're getting. Let's get a phone caller in. We've got Carl calling from Indiana. Hi, Carl. You're on the air.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
My comment was I never got an education, but I made sure I raised 5 daughters. I made sure the 3 of them that was capable, they did get their education. They got their college. Now, they're making good money, but they're also raising a family. Now, the question is, if and how, if my wife and myself needed help, how could they raise their family, get their kids an education, and help their parents?
So what are you saying, Carl, that that the cutbacks in education, like student loans and all that, would hurt them?
No, what I'm saying is if welfare and everything is cut down to where the wife and I couldn't get along on what welfare we could get her, and I am not working. I do have a lot of problems, physical problems.
Sure.
So I'm just saying, with things going the way they are, how could they raise their family and get their education and still help their parents?
Pat, let me make a point.
Carl, thanks for your point and your call. Go ahead.
Let me make a point, Pat, in response to Carl's question about reality and perception. When we talk education budget cuts in Washington, everyone immediately, and the administration helps promote this, unfortunately, even though I like Mike as a person, the sky is falling, schools are closing down, the NEA puts on ads showing kids locked out of school. In fact, we're talking about sending money to school districts. Less than 50% of the dollars spent on education ever gets to urban city classrooms, let alone in even worse areas where sometimes it's less than 60%, I mean less than 40% that ever gets to classrooms. What I was talking about before in Chapter 1 is a perfect example. You have Chapter 1 coordinators in schools, at the school district, at the county level, then at the state level, then at Washington. So Mike isn't necessarily completely filled in about how many layers there are to the government in terms of how much money is going out and being wasted. So those accountability measures that are put in place, we can talk all day long, but the fact of the matter is Washington cannot administer well a local program. And if you hold local schools accountable for good work, they will do good works, and we haven't. We have held them accountable to state laws and regulation, not to people, and that's all anybody who's talking about restoring and devolving control to the local community is talking about. We're not talking about hurting schools, we're talking about helping them and empowering them.
Jeanne, you made your point. I want to give Mike a chance to respond to that as we close.
I appreciate it. The rhetoric is easy, but the fact of the matter is that the money that the federal government provides is very targeted. It helps poor students primarily, particularly in states where it's often hard for them to target their own funds to poor communities. A larger percentage of federal money goes down to the classroom than of state or local funds that are allocated to schools. And half of the money that the federal government spends in education goes to help people pay their way through college, where no other level of government provides that kind of support. So it's a very, very important role. There have been times in the past when it's had more rules and less performance, but it is being changed and changed dramatically, and we need to keep moving in that direction.
So Mike, you're saying keep the federal government investing in education, but make it more flexible.
Absolutely. And if you look at any public opinion poll in the last 6 months, if there's one thing that people agree on, it's that the federal government needs to keep investing in education. It does not need to turn around and back out. We do not need to get rid of the programs. We need to make them work better, but we need to keep putting the funds into them.
Okay, Mike and Jeanne, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but we'll have to have you back to talk more about this.